One of the areas where it seems we have trouble being rational as human beings is where things aren't binary. They aren't like fully good or fully bad, and there's only partial progress towards something. And we want to use that partial progress as some kind of justification for belief in the final goal. I'll just give an example. A friend, she had a ethical movement that she was following. And when I gave reasons to dispute whether actually that following those supposedly ethical practices would actually lead to the intended result, she responded, "Oh, well, I'm not strictly following this. I'm just doing my best to follow it." And of course, this is begging the question, because if it's not actually a good path to, being more ethical, then partially following it is a bizarre mitigation. Surely you would just not follow it. To partially follow it and say that you do that as a justification is basically to beg the question about it being a good path. You wouldn't slowly walk along a path that you know leads to the wrong place any more than you would run along a path that leads to the wrong place. You're still assuming that it's leading to the right place, but you're getting out of it somehow in your own head by trying to, soften it. Another example sort of comes up in the software industry, this kind of thinking. There's a style of programming that I also won't name because it's got many memetically infected zealots promoting it. But I've seen multiple conversations where people will show the flaws in this style of programming, and they'll show that it's more verbose and it's actually less hard to follow. And the response will be, "Oh, yes, well, sure, in these small examples, it's harder to read and harder to understand. But if you scale it up to very large systems, it's absolutely necessary." And what an assumption, right? What an assumption that if you take something that's worse and pile it on top of each other 1,000 times, the result will be better than if you'd taken something better and piled it on top of itself 1,000 times. I mean, it's not necessarily never the case, but it's certainly not automatically justified. Another example from software, which I find quite disturbing, is I saw someone gushing about one of the new GPT artificial intelligences, where you can give it instructions and it will do better than the GPT-3 artificial intelligence on following those instructions. But it still doesn't quite follow the instructions, and it gives answers that are not quite accurate, rather pretentious, and just overall unreliable. And they're so excited about this progress. But what makes you think that an artificial intelligence, and you tell it to write a poem, and it has absolutely no understanding of rhyme, absolutely no understanding of meter, and almost no metaphor? You don't have to know much about poetry to know these, but because most people just have no interest in poetry, they see this thing being instructed to write poetry and putting together a stanza of sort of, I don't know, the kind of thing people say where they think it sounds deep, but it's not, but it's not poetry. And they're so impressed. And I'm like, well, what makes you think that it's going to go from this pretentious crap to actual poetry? And the same thing, like they've got similar AIs that are designed to write code. Actually, they gave an example of summarizing code. And it gave this explanation of the code, and it was wrong. And it wasn't really understanding the essence of the problem. It was just looking at the code. It was scanning it for cues that it could use to say something that sounded intelligent. And anyone with an understanding and analysis ability to actually read through the code and compare it to the description this AI was giving could see, well, actually, this actually has a very poor understanding of what's happening. It's just trying to sound smart. And these AIs were taught on the internet, of course. They were taught by people, and this is one of the worst habits of human beings. And the people who do this, and let's be honest, we all do it sometimes, the tendency to do this is more common than actually knowing what we're talking about and saying what we think about it. So if you were to have confidence that this would somehow transcend the human limitations on which it was trained, because you've seen it make progress to get to this level, how are you justifying that assumption? Like, why assume that? I'm assuming that your end goal is actually to write stuff that's good, something that an expert analyzing it would agree with. Why are you treating this as progress? Because it's not even on the path that you want to be on. Like it's already turned down the crossroads to pretense and sounding good and not actually being good. Which is like, if you want to replace people and say, oh, this AI is going to do better than the average person, well, it's going down the path of the average person who you want to replace. It's not going down the path of the experts and elites who really deeply understand this and have well-founded opinions on the topic and really good practices. It's just following the mob, and the mob is going down a bad path, in my opinion. And so I guess the theme of this video is not particularly about that, but it's an example. It's an example of where people's rationality just starts to derail the moment there's the suggestion that there's progress towards a goal. And if you're watching this, hoping that I'll give you some kind of tip that might help you be more rational, I would just say, look, I don't have a solution, but be aware of it. Like, notice it in yourself and notice it when other people are saying things to you. Are they getting a bit confused when they're comparing an ideal goal to a current state that's partially in that direction? What assumptions are they making that might not be founded?